I'm Sean Chinski, the Chief Sales Officer at Raft.ai. I've been in SaaS startups for the last 20 plus years, and specifically in IT for about the last half of that, and then supply chain the last 3 or 4 years specifically. So I lead our sales team, partner team, and kind of retention and growth with all of our accounts. So most of anything commercial, I'm in charge of at Raft. It's quite a few things, but it starts with proof and references. I think is the first thing that they want. They want to hear how a peer or a competitor has specifically saved dollars or increased revenue or whatever it be. So not just the AI models, accuracy, and a dream of what could be, but specific proof and references. I think the second thing is scalability. Is people want to automate across the business. I think it used to be sort of in pockets or regions or specific business units, but they really want to show that things can work in global operations and go across the entire business. And specifically on top of that, will it work in, let's say our industry has a lot of peak volumes. So will it work when things go crazy or get messy or the regulations change, as we've seen a lot over the last year? So that scalability factor is a big one. And the next is integration. A lot of these folks have different systems. There could be acquisitions they've made that they have multiple systems, and really being able to integrate across those solutions, not have to replace them, and augment the people as well. So specifically, most commonly there we see, of course, like ERP, TMS, those types of things. And so being able to integrate across those solutions and having it sort of an AI layer in between all of them or connecting all of them is important. Probably two more, I think. One is a consolidated solution. So I think a lot of people are starting to fly to AI solutions, and it can solve this and it can solve that. And the next thing you know, you've got 7 vendors across the board, and that just gets confusing. And then they probably start building their solutions, and then they have crossover, and you get this vendor sprawl that you start to sort of lose visibility of who's doing what. And then lastly, probably fairly obvious, but they want ROI. They want to reduce costs, whether that's customs entries or audits or whatever that might be, minimizing risk across regulations and compliance, and then really just a trust and explainability of being able to show how that's actually working, not have to guess and make predictions or things like that. I think having tangible ROI that they can actually see and measure and calculate is probably the last. Maybe the first one, but probably the most major one for the last. And then to the next wave of, how are those conversations evolving? I think even in the last year, as LLMs have continued to evolve, AI has become more mainstream, right? Everybody's kind of played with it in their personal life with ChatGPT or whatever it might be. I think it's moved from buzzwords to really outcomes. So, not like, it used to be, we want to do AI automation, and they didn't really know what that meant. Now it's, I want to reduce my tariffs by 50% and, gain those fees back, or very, very specific to kind of business outcomes, whatever that might be. It could be staff efficiency. It could be compliance. It could be some of the things I mentioned before. The other piece is probably just going, again, to like specific value narratives versus maybe feature set. And like product features. So again, today's complaint, probably the tariffs and compliance are the most obvious that people are really focused on trying to fix. Also, I think they probably a lot set out with visions of AI automation across the business, and actually found that small pilots or quick wins or a specific business unit or a region or whatever that might be, so that they could prove that could do it. But again, still with that vision of how do you ramp that globally is probably a big shift I think we've seen. And then the last couple would be, I think, again, even a year ago, maybe 6 months ago at conferences or just in conversations you'd have, there were still a lot of skeptics, right? Is AI the next fad? Is it here to stay? And I think there's probably still a few of those naysayers out there, but for the most part, I think it's gone from sort of skeptics and validation of AI and automation to actually wanting knowledge and education and discussing best practices. We're seeing a lot of customers wanting to do day-long workshops, maybe even multi-day workshops, where we go in and talk to 20, 50, 70 people about what we're seeing in AI. It doesn't have to even just be about Raft. It's really about the problems we're seeing solved from AI and automation. And then the very last, I think, would be, again, sort of as I talked about, starting in regions. It probably used to be more centralized with an individual or a business. So it might be operations, or it might be the CIO. And now we're seeing CFOs involved, CEOs, COOs. Even most of these are a board level decision and approval. So seeing that escalate, I think, to multiple executive sponsors, not only needing to be involved, but wanting to be involved and talking about that global scale and how this impacts their business, not only today, but down the road and down the future, are probably how some of that's evolved. A lot of the ones I probably just said, but I think a couple of the big ones are, in traditional, you see a lot about like the complexity and the fit, and there's probably more established solutions. And so you kind of get into feature set and those types of things where it's probably just more, I don't want to say commoditized, but more established, and they kind of know, and there's multiple competitors and they can kind of compare, and it comes down to what's the feature set, what's the cost, those types of things. Whereas AI, I think there's a lot of confusion, lack of education, just unknown around the trust of it, right? Is it accurate enough to work? The adoption, will people actually adopt this? Again, there's a lot around compliance and different parts of the world, what that might mean in terms of what they can do or not do, or how they have to do it. I would definitely say, again, back to the decision makers, you're seeing multiple C-suite decision makers in there versus, again, it probably was one or two, maybe three before. And then I think, again, back to there's probably two things in there. So one is that whole proof of point, again, where it's let's find a low-hanging fruit solution, where we can go tackle this, that we can prove it out, and then we can also show that path to scalability. I think is really a smart way to do it, right? You don't want to just jump in and try to do everything. So kind of doing where's the biggest pain, and are they viable to do that? And then probably, I do think, again, back to like this best practice notion, the idea that it's much more consultative. There aren't a lot of AI supply chain experts sitting out there, so people don't necessarily know who to go to. Raft's been going at this almost 8 years. I've been in it for about half that amount of time, so I think they are really looking for guidance and education and trends and what's working. As at the same time, what doesn't, right? Where have you seen companies fail, and why did they fail? And so yeah, I think it's a much more educational conversation than traditional. And so that, of course, changes how we work with the customer, what that journey is. So really digging in, understanding their challenges. Like I said, going in, doing workshops with them, sitting down with the stakeholders, and understanding what their processes are and where are their gaps, where are their problems, where are their bottlenecks, and then talking about how do we go tackle a problem that we kind of both get a win, and then scale up from there. I think the biggest thing is change management, and having a stakeholder, a project manager, whatever it is, that can drive that has executive support. So it needs executive support, but then it needs a sort of day-to-day hands-on person that's actually managing it and driving that change. And then also, I think, just the organizational culture. So is that company ready for change? Are they afraid of change? Do they think AI is going to take their job? That's a pretty common thing we hear. And I think, as Cuban said, AI is not going to take your job. It's the person using AI effectively is going to take your job. And so, does the company have that type of culture that will embrace that will embrace new technology, or are they afraid of it? I think those probably three things are the difference in it working or failing. And most companies, I think, can eventually get over those hurdles, but I think those are the biggest ones where, particularly when it starts to come in, you get that notion of like, uh-oh, half of us aren't going to have our jobs. And, I don't think our buyers are thinking that way. They're thinking more, we can keep the team we have, we can equip them to do bigger and better things, make their jobs more enjoyable. And maybe it takes the job of future hires, right? But we can go scale our business. We were just talking to a customer last week, and he said, if we get when we get to the fully scale that we both want to and envision, we can more than double this company and not have to hire anybody. And so I think that's a pretty exciting adventure. So yeah, I don't think it's that fearful thing can be a big factor, I guess, on the side of why it doesn't work. I think first is the data and systems have to be mature. So they have ideally a central or singular ERP TMS. Maybe it's a couple, but ideally they have one, or they at least have it kind of a standardized process under control. And they're generally willing to share that information, early on. If they're kind of want to keep that to the chest, that's going to be a challenge. Obviously, we need to share data across. So I think it starts with data. If we don't have that, it's going to be challenging. I think another one is that they've tried to do this on their own. Maybe they already use RPA or OCR or certain things like that, but it's still too manual, and they're starting to hit their limits, or it's not someone's role and it's taking on what their role might be. But they've tried, or maybe they tried to even build a solution, but they tried something and clearly understand that it's not going to scale to what they need. Of course, with anything, executive sponsorship, I think, is really important. Not only a sort of check the box, yeah, we're doing this, but they actually view it as a strategic initiative that they understand can change the path of the future of the company, one way or the other, I suppose. And then, that they can quantify the problem. I think not only that they just acknowledge it, but they can actually define how much that's costing them in dollars lost or hours lost or both. And they are thinking specifically around cost and risk and growth, and how that, in competitive landscape, that's a big one of how this the competitors that are embracing automation are moving ahead, right? They're able to move faster. They're able to offer more in their SLAs to their customers, whether that's hours or speed or accuracy or all the above. I think that's a big one. And then probably lastly, and touch on this a little bit, but the biggest one I would say is just change management. They, again, need to be ready to embrace change management. This isn't just sort of plug the system in and it runs in the back end and one or two people takes care of it. It's a company-wide shift. And I think the good thing is particularly in the last probably 6 to 9, 12 months, we're seeing more and more of that, where folks are understanding this needs to be a company-wide thing. This can't just sit in ops or supply chain or whatever. It touches majority, if not all, of the org. And so, again, being able to ready to embrace that from a cultural perspective, from a process perspective, and having kind of ownership at both levels, sort of the direct user level, as well as executive sponsorship, and again, probably even board participation and support as well. Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself, but a lot of the opposite, I guess, of the signals that they're ready. So first, data quality and accessibility. Do they have legacy systems with siloed data and fragmented across the org and a bunch of spreadsheets and 5 instances of a TMS? That's probably the biggest challenge, because if you have inconsistent or inaccurate data, automation's essentially impossible, right? You've got to kind of have that layer in place. And I think another big piece that we see this a lot, particularly with legacy systems, is having APIs ready to connect the systems. Again, if you can't connect all those systems, automation's only going to take you so far. So both kind of data quality, accessibility, I think is a huge piece. We touched on the change management. So if they're not ready, I think that's a big one. They've got to go face that. We've seen that with some organizations where, maybe executive sponsorship, even the board level, maybe a senior leader was very much on board, and they went to roll it out. The team just sort of totally put up their guards in defense and essentially set the program up for failure because of their fear. And so that's probably the next one, is just that fear of AI, and how do you educate the team of why you're doing this and how it benefits all of them, and that they're not going to be gone in 3 months or 6 months or whatever. I think the process complexity is another really big one. So there's not a lot of standardization in supply chain, right? You're working with multiple shippers and carriers, and there's a lot of people involved in that process, and different docs with different files and different lengths, and that passes from one person to the next, and they mark it up, and then it maybe gets printed off and somebody literally handwrites it, or just do you even have different process for different customers? And that process complexity and defining what ideal workflows are is a big one, and sort of combining that back to the change management culture is thinking about a way of doing business with AI and automation, not necessarily plugging your old ways into new technology, but actually thinking about what's the best way to do it with the technology that's available today. And so I think it's a lot of challenges. People just want to say, hey, we've always done it this way. Great. Just plug it into the AI system and let them do it. And that isn't necessarily the right answer, because the way you've been doing it might not be the best way to do it today. So I think that's a big one around the whole process. Leadership alignment, of course. We've talked about that a few times, but we hear a lot. Companies always question, right? Build versus buy. And so you may have some leaders that want to go down this path, and they're very much aligned. And then someone else is saying, well, my team can build it. And we've found far, far more often than not, that's a big challenge, right? We've heard companies who've sunk tens of millions of dollars into trying to figure this out and didn't get anywhere, and ultimately went back to a solution provider like us. So I think that's a big one, leadership alignment, or politics, or whatever you want to call it, but making sure sort of everybody's on board, that nobody's there trying to botch the end goal. And then probably we talked about scale, but I do think not only a roadmap to how do we scale this, but also some governance of what does that actually look like. So kind of running through, we start here, we go there, what's the old, sort of crawl, walk, run type of mentality, and understanding that there may be different things that change as you kind of go through that process. Tariffs might change, your governance that whole process might change, and just being kind of having a plan, but then also being nimble to change it. And then lastly, just again, the ROI, right? I think being able to quantify that before they go in, and understanding how long it's going to take. It may take 12 months to get their payback. And, is that okay? Because at the end of the day, if it's a year down the road or however far down the road, understanding that this ROI is not only going to help them with their current customers, with growing new customers, again, employee satisfaction. We heard another customer recently say they essentially, the SLAs and the customer service they're able to provide because of all the automation and all of those mundane tasks that have been removed, they actually see a world where they don't think they would lose a single customer, because those customers are being serviced so much differently than they used to in the past, and that no competitor could sort of come in and compete with that. So I think having that ROI, not only going in of understanding what the future ROI might be, but how do you, again, get to that quick win that kind of validates it and proves it, so that you can show that will scale as well. So those are the handful of things I think of challenges they face.